I won't introduce the panel. I'm going to introduce the person who's taking my job and moderating the panel, who I've worked with since I first got involved with the National Academy of Engineering, and he helped spark my interest in it. Thomas Katsouleas is the Executive Vice President and the Provost of the University of Virginia. He's a professor of electrical and computing engineering and physics at UVA. He served as the Dean of the Pratt School of Engineering, a professor of electrical and computer engineering at Duke from 2008 to 2015. I knew him when that's what he was doing. His scholarship is on plasmas, particle accelerators, and light sources. He's authored or co-authored more than 200 publications and given more than 50 major invited talks, and he is one of the creators of the National Academy of Engineering Grand Challenges Scholars Program. Ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome for Thomas.
Thank you, Ali. Appreciate that. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to do my best to channel my inner Ali Velshi. You know, it was at the end of a day much like this, just a little over 8 years ago, that I took the stage with two of my colleagues, Yanis Yortsos from USC and Rick Miller from Olin College, and we announced our intent to create a program that would prepare students to address grand challenges over the course of their careers. Since that time, we got a boost from the National Academy of Engineering, particularly Dan Moat, and then in 2013 from the White House, that prompted 122 deans from around the country to commit to create Grand Challenge Scholars programs of their own. And what they and we recognized was that the Grand Challenges were not a list, but a call to action, a call to prepare students with the skill set and mindset that they would need to tackle the grand challenges. And we all recognize that engineering fundamentals alone were not enough to do that. Well, since that time, fast forward to today, there are now approximately 50 active Grand Challenge Scholars programs. We are just about to approach, we're approaching our 1,000th graduate of the program. So that's kind of amazing after just a few years. And interestingly, as we graduate 1,000 Grand Challenge Scholars, roughly 50% of them are women. And this is something that Randy and Atkins and I noticed at the 100 mark. When we looked at the first 100 graduates, exactly 50 were women. And so I think this speaks to the power of the Grand Challenges to appeal broadly to people who care about helping people. And that's the appeal, that's the hook. So since then, the Grand Challenge Scholars Program has spread to 4 other countries. It's now in Singapore, Malaysia, the UK, and Australia. And I'm quite excited that there are 3 proposals in now from China that are under consideration. So soon we'll have Grand Challenge Scholars programs there as well. And I spoke to the dean from Peking University, Dan Zhang, who is here at this meeting, and he said he has 100 fellow deans in China that are all interested in talking about developing Grand Challenge Scholars programs of their own. So it's quite an exciting and auspicious time for the Grand Challenge Scholars program, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to share with you what the program's about. And rather than stand here and tell you what the program is, I am fortunate to have the help of 4 recent graduates of the Grand Challenge Scholars program, and they're going to come and share with you their experiences, and I hope that through their eyes and experiences, you'll find out what the Grand Challenge Scholars Program is about, how it works, and maybe even a little bit about where it's headed in the future. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first Grand Challenge Scholar graduate. He is Kushal Sitharam. Kushal graduated as a Grand Challenge Scholar from Duke University in 2014 with a BS in Electrical and Computer Engineering. After graduating, he spent a, quote, gap year. In his gap year, he did 3 things. He became a science policy intern at the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. He started a project aimed at enabling better science communication, and he studied classical Indian music in India. He is currently pursuing a PhD at MIT in combined theoretical physics and quantum computing. Would you please welcome Kushal Sitharam? Welcome. Please have a seat. So you graduated from the original Grand Challenge Scholars Program, the one at Duke. So I wonder if you could just tell us, for those who are in the audience not familiar with the Grand Challenge Scholars Program, a little bit about how it works, perhaps using Duke as the example of what a Grand Challenge Scholars Program is, and maybe even yourself as an example.
Sure. So there was a brief intro to it given this morning in Lord Barr's presentation. There are 5 components to the Grand Challenge Scholarship, and it is a technical or like heavy research or some other project that you work on. There is an interdisciplinary curriculum component, which is generally aimed at taking classes in public policy or business or something to complement the engineering classes that we take. There is a global component and an entrepreneurial component and a service learning component. So for example, my project was to work on a sanitation system for developing countries. Specifically, we were field testing it in a village in Togo. And I did this as a combined effort with another Grand Challenge scholar who was in my year as well. For the service learning component, I taught at a local high school and actually tried to bring in the Grand Challenges as an exposure to engineering there, though how that turned out was an interesting story for perhaps another time.
Okay.
For my entrepreneurship component, we took the idea for the sanitation project and developed it into a business plan of sorts and competed in a pitch competition for it. And that was actually really useful, not just to think about it from an economical sense, which was eventually what ended up being the whole incentive structure for the project came out of that, but also to get feedback from judges in industry, which were a little bit different than what we would have gotten from the research advisors and mentors we had from that perspective.
Okay. So you did these 5 things, but what is the value of that to you as a student or as an emerging engineer?
So I think, to me, what was the real, purpose of the Grand Challenge Scholars Program was to answer the question, what is engineering? Mm-hmm. So we heard this morning that when Bob Langer was asked why he deserved an award in engineering and what, drug development, drug delivery mechanisms had to do with that, and his response was perfect, I think, was that it's the mindset. Engineering is a mindset. And I went to science and tech high school, and I had no idea what engineering was until I walked into college. And even then, you start learning. I learned how transmission lines work or how to build a microprocessor or things like this. But if you gave me a real-world problem and said, this is a real problem, I want you to figure out how to solve it with a high degree of success, right? I would not have really known where to start. There are a lot of things you have to consider, first focus down on what part of the problem you want to work on. Make sure you talk to stakeholders involved to make sure they care about this, talk about economic and social context to it. And after incorporating and thinking about all of that, only then do you start thinking about what is an appropriate technical solution, right? And the Grand Challenge Scholarship was a great way to cut your teeth on that type of thinking and to instill that perspective in your mind so that when you approach problems later on, whether it's much more research focused or much more like in global development or anything else, you have that mindset walking in.
Great. Well, since that time, you've kind of evolved from doing sanitation systems in Togo to working in a combination of theoretical physics and quantum computing at MIT. And I guess this ties a little bit to the 14th Grand Challenge of Engineering the Tools of Scientific Discovery. Tell us a little bit about that work, and what is it you hope to accomplish in your career and with your current research on quantum computing?
Right. So my idea for working on both of these things was personally to connect what I'm interested in learning and problems I'm interested in working on, right? And you can look at the problems being things like the Grand Challenges. And working on getting a strong physics training during my PhD and then working on quantum computing seemed to be a really good way to do this, and I'll explain momentarily with an example. So one of the big things that quantum computers are going to be useful for is quantum simulation. So a lot of R&D we do today, and some of this was mentioned earlier, is getting to the point where we care about effects so small that quantum effects are non-negligible. And classical computers are almost inherently bad at doing this. Mm-hmm. And there are many interesting methods, like during the Google talk earlier today, you heard how neural networks can be used to basically take the results of DFT calculations and simulate quantum chemistry. And that's incredible, but quantum computers provide an alternative approach to answer those same questions. Right. And connecting it back to the Grand Challenges, one example would be like, okay, high temperature superconductivity is something that people can't simulate on a classical computer very well. But if we can understand that through quantum simulation by coming up with these algorithms for quantum computers, high temperature superconducting magnets are both used to provide fusion, the magnetic confinement for fusion, and to make that relative energy that they put out economical, as well as energy storage. It's an excellent way for lossless energy storage, which is related to the intermittency problems for solar energy, right? So if you're looking to make solar energy economical or even implement, fusion energy, which are two of the Grand Challenges, you need, it would be really helpful to have better superconducting magnets. And this is one example of how these things connect.
So things like Cooper pairs that are intrinsically quantum behavior, better modeled through quantum computing rather than supercomputing with traditional computing.
Right, there's a fundamental limit.
Great.
It's hard to cross.
Well, thanks for sharing that with us. Let's get another perspective now by inviting our next Grand Challenge Scholar graduate, who is Amara Uyanna. You heard about Amara briefly in Rajiv Shah's talk this morning about her work in the Niger Delta. She was a Grand Challenge Scholar student at Louisiana Tech University, a student of my good friend and colleague Jenna Carpenter, and to give her a shout out. And she graduated in 2016. She's currently a strategy and operations consultant for the Relief Group, and spelled RELEAF, okay, and a development associate for Sustainable International, and a master's student in global policy studies at UT Austin. Please welcome Amara. Can you slide over?
Absolutely.
I need to pick that up first.
Thank you. Welcome. Thank you. So I understand you just flew in, and gee, are your arms tired? You flew in about, what, 2 days ago from Nigeria?
Yes, I flew in Monday, 2 a.m.
So hopefully you recovered a little bit. So can you share with us a little bit what your project was that Rajiv alluded to in the Niger Delta, and how it connected perhaps to what you did as a Grand Challenge Scholar?
Oh, so the Niger Delta is the oil hub of Nigeria. That's where all the oil and gas is, and Nigeria is an oil exporting country. The Niger Delta, unfortunately, has undergone a lot of oil spillage. So in the past few decades, there has been over 10 million barrels of oil spilled without cleanup. So I work with Sustainability International, a nonprofit organization that is trying to alleviate the disasters that have come from the oil spillage, because the Niger Delta is a riverine area, so people predominantly fish and farm. So because of the oil spillage, people can't fish and people can't farm. So not only is the environment destroyed, the income is destroyed. So people can't go to schools, children can't eat. It's a whole convoluted situation. And we're working to raise funds to do that cleanup. But we noticed that when we're talking to people about the problem, people can't fathom what we're talking about. So we got a contract with Al Jazeera, and I went to Nigeria with the Al Jazeera team, and we put together the first virtual reality documentary about the Niger Delta so that people can actually be immersed in that situation. And hopefully that will ease the explanation, so it's easier to raise funds and deploy the biotechnology that we have.
So what seemed like at first, thank you. Good, it's kind of amazing. So this is kind of a softball question, but it clearly is, so it's not just a chemical engineering problem.
Oh, no. It's engineering, policy, people, economics, everything.
Yeah. Amara, I read a quote from you about what the Grand Challenge Scholar Program meant to you, and I made a comment to you when I read it that this is as close to poetry as prose gets. Do you mind sharing that quote with us?
Of course. I said that the Grand Challenge Scholars Program broadened my horizons on the endless opportunities available to me as an engineer and propelled me to step outside my STEM comfort zone. And as a result, I have found comfort zones in previously foreign fields. So like he said, I'm getting my master's in global policy studies and economic development, coming from chemical engineering. I would never have imagined that. But the Grand Challenge Scholars Program made in Louisiana Tech, you had to do an internship with a global focus. So I interned with coming from Nigeria, I'm originally from Nigeria. I interned with ConocoPhillips in Houston, working on optimizing their project in Angola. So it doesn't get more global than that.
Right.
And I had to function as an engineer, optimizing the engineering processes and communicating to the laymen in layman terms what the engineers are trying to do. So that got me on my first track to where I am now.
Right. So we heard a lot this morning from Rajiv Shah and also from Deng Zhonghan about the importance of policy in engineering and the importance for engineers to engage in policy. And as you mentioned, you're getting now your master's in global policy. Why is it important, do you think, for engineers to engage in policy?
I think engineers bring an interesting perspective to policy. So sitting in my class, for instance, most of the people there are political science backgrounds or history backgrounds or things like that. But you notice that as much as engineers are innovating, we need to understand, there needs to be people who understand the engineering of things as well as the people part of things. I was talking to somebody last night and she was talking about how there was a stove that was innovated and people don't use those stoves because people that used to use firewoods to cook, they use those firewoods for a reason because the smoke from the firewood, for instance, sends out flies. So if you innovate and you give them an electric burning stove, it takes away, so you need to understand the different complexities of the issues that people are facing so that when you're implementing policies, you can better merge the two.
Similar to the last session with Dame Sally Davies talking about the complexity of microbial disease. Having to understand all of these interactions just goes far beyond just engineering, understanding behavior and so on. Well, so tell us a little bit about the program at Louisiana Tech. We got an example from Duke, equal time here. How does it work at Louisiana Tech and how did you get involved in it?
Well, I got involved, like you mentioned, Dr. Carpenter, another shout out to her. She was my calculus professor, she's over there. She was my calculus professor in my freshman year, and she told, there was an info session, and she talked about it. But at the time, you had to be a sophomore with a minimum GPA of 3.5. So I took the flyer, and I posted it on my wall, and I was like, circle the 3.5, because that was a goal. And they had the same 5, service learning, global component research, interdisciplinary studies, and entrepreneurship. Right. So I did a research with Dr. Weiss, who's not here now, but I did a research dealing with thermal energy storage devices and how to optimize that. Fortunately for me, another person in my lab was working on solar energy storage devices. So we worked together, and our prototype was used to enter the entrepreneurship part of it. So those two were taken care of. And then I did service learning. So I tutored for my first 3 years, K through 12 up until college level tutoring. Global perspective was my internship. I mentioned earlier, ConocoPhillips, Houston, Angola, Nigeria, that covered that. And then interdisciplinary courses. I had to take courses in sociology, economics, psychology, and that pretty much took care of all of it.
That's enough. Well, thank you, Amara. That really gives us a flavor for what the program is about. And between you and Kushal, I think we have a good sense. I think we'll turn now to our third Grand Challenge scholar, who will tell us a little bit about what the program looks like at a university that didn't have one before he got there. And that's Clemson University. So I'd like to introduce now Aaron Gordon. He's our most recent Grand Challenge scholar, graduating just 2 months ago with a BS in civil engineering. He's currently in Atlanta with Kimley Horn Associates working on infrastructure projects while pursuing a PhD in civil engineering at Georgia Tech. Please welcome Aaron Gordon. Great. I guess we both come from a school where orange ties are appropriate, right? University of Virginia and Clemson. Good, we got the memo. Welcome.
Thanks.
Great. So I just mentioned to the audience that Clemson, when you arrived there, didn't have a Grand Challenge Scholars Program, and so you went ahead and created one. Why? How did that happen?
I just didn't have enough work yet, so.
Okay.
No, but when I was visiting colleges my senior year of high school, I was kind of introduced to the Grand Challenges and Grand Challenge Scholars programs when I was visiting, and I really liked 2 things about it. The first thing I liked is I liked the fact that it almost had a list about how to become a globally competent and successful engineer. So that really appealed to me. I'm the type of person that like to make lists and write things down. It's the only way I'm going to get things done. So I really like that aspect of it. If I fulfill these 5 components, then I'm well on my way to becoming someone that might be able to change the world. And the second component I really liked was the idea of the fellowship that scholars had. The idea is that I could hang out and work with students that had a similar passion, a similar ambition, but came at it with a different approach and had different ideas.
That's awesome. So tell us, how did you start the program? I mean, did you just walk into the dean's office one day and say, let's do this, or what?
So I worked with a group of students that I was friends with my freshman year, and we spoke to a professor, actually Dr. Leidy Klotz, who you stole from Clemson a few years ago.
we borrow or, recruit. We use different euphemisms, but yes, we did.
So we worked with him, and then we found that the Clemson College of Engineering was very willing and to not only put resources behind us, but also people and logistics, and even a small office space in which we could work together and just have fellowship together. So
Right.
It was really just a team effort all the way around.
So there are 115 universities represented here in the audience, but only 24 active Grand Challenge Scholars programs at those universities. Any advice for the other 90 or so students from the other 90 or so universities?
Yeah, I would say it's really, with the Grand Challenge Scholars Program, what you put in is what you're going to get out of it. So if it's something that you're interested in, you can put a lot of time into it, and it can really define your college experience. Or if it's something that you just don't know you have time for, you can also work with professors and other students to at least set up the program and then kind of see where things go from there.
Great. And as part of the 5 components, you did a project in Haiti. Can you tell us a little bit about what that was?
Yeah, I've been very involved with engineering in Haiti since I got started at Clemson. I've been down on several trips and helped manage several projects with the local community there, along with industry advisors at Clemson and other students at Clemson as well. We worked on projects from clean water systems to latrines to aquaculture facilities to schools, churches, almost anything that the community expressed a need for and funding was available for.
Okay, terrific. I apologize, I'm struggling with the iPad, which is supposed to have questions on it, and I'm not seeing them, so, they just popped up. So, so thanks, Aaron, and that's an inspiring message for those who follow on. And let's invite out our 4th panelist, and then we'll take some questions from the audience. Our 4th panelist is Ellen Chisa. She's a graduate of Olin College of Engineering, completing a BS in Electrical and Computer Engineering in 2010. She is currently on leave from the MBA program at Harvard Business School, while she serves as CEO of Dark Incorporated, a software development tools startup, though it sounds to me like a Marvel Comics movie title. But anyway, we'll find out what Dark Incorporated is. There, Ellen says she strives to work on products that help people have more meaningful real-world lives. Please welcome Ellen Chisa. Hi. Okay, so I set you up. What is Dark Incorporated?
So like you said, it's a software dev tool startup. And really what we're trying to do is a lot of the time when you're building software products, you're going through the same hassles that every single other company is doing. We're spending a ton of time figuring out how are we going to do our version control, how are we going to handle deployment, how are we going to pick our infrastructure. And any time you spend doing that is time that's taken away from you trying to solve that core business problem that you actually want to build to make the world better.
Terrific. So does this tie at all to any of your experiences as a Grand Challenge Scholar?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think, like you were mentioning before, one of the great things about the Grand Challenge Scholars Program is that it motivates students to go into engineering because it sees what they can be able to do. I think another thing that I love about it is each of the 14 challenges is really ambitious. Any company you would make to solve one of them could be considered a moonshot. And they scale really well. You can make incremental improvements to any of those problems, but you can also try to take on the whole thing at once. And I think my project in the Grand Challenge Scholars Program, working on the challenge of personalized learning and trying to build a learning management system for middle schoolers to keep them in math and science for longer and excited about those disciplines, really taught me that I could try to solve a giant problem and not just something incremental or not just selling something else.
So after you take your startup to the next level, you're going to return to Harvard and get your MBA. Is that the plan?
That's the plan. So this is actually, for any of the students in the audience, Harvard has a great program called the 2+2, where you can apply while you're still an undergraduate, and that's what I did. And so it was actually around the same time I was doing the Grand Challenge Scholars Program. And they also will let you take leave while you're there. So they're really great if you can be gone for up to 5 years to build companies. And I think one of the key things with startups and with these projects and with these problems that face the world, when you find the right solution and the right problem, you want to take the time to do it then. And it doesn't mean sitting in a classroom for another year while someone else might solve the problem or while it might get worse. And I think that's a great thing they've done.
So long term, do you think your path lies along entrepreneurship, a combination of entrepreneurship and engineering? What do you see happening after your degree at Harvard?
Yeah, I actually think of it as different lenses you can see the world through. And so I expect to continue to be an entrepreneur. But I think one of the greatest things about the program and about studying engineering is you can always see the world as an engineer. You can always look at a problem and say, how am I going to break this down? How am I going to solve it? The same thing with a design background, you can look at it and say, how is this benefiting people? How do I want to do it? And then again, with entrepreneurship, how can I turn this into a business so we're able to fund ourselves rather than always relying on grants or on something else?
I think that really captures it. It's like you can watch the evening news and say, gee, that's really a shame. Or you can watch the evening news as an engineer and say, gee, how might we fix that? And you've captured it very nicely. So I'd like to now just turn to some questions for all of you. What's kind of interesting here is you notice we have different paths that people have taken as a result of this program. We have two that are pursuing PhDs. One's pursuing a career in policy, a degree in policy, and one in entrepreneurship, all elements of the program. Let me ask you, though, despite the diversity of your future paths, do you guys see yourself staying engaged with the Grand Challenge Scholars programs, either at your alma mater or the network that you're forming on this stage and elsewhere?
So for me, the answer to that is definitely yes. I think when I was at Olin, we were the first year of the Grand Challenge Scholars, and one of the things that's been most rewarding for me staying engaged with my alma mater is that every year I'm able to review portfolios of new students and see what work they're doing and stay connected and give them feedback and help them think through the problems they're trying to solve, and that's been a great opportunity.
Great.
I think one of the beautiful things about the Grand Challenge, just the Grand Challenges in general, are that you really can't get away from them, really. No matter what you're working on, it's eventually going to tie back to what these challenges are. And as someone that would probably be interested in teaching at some point and helping the next generation, I think that the Grand Challenge Scholars Program is a great way to give back.
Great.
Absolutely. I think there's also a global social media presence building. So there's a Facebook page for all the past scholars. I don't know how many of us are on there, but I know that there's an effort to make sure that we stay together, or we stay in touch at least, so that we can continue imputing an effect on the program anywhere we can.
I think one thing that would be interesting from maybe a continuation perspective rather than just like a strict mentorship, which is also very useful, is if there was a way to connect undergrads who are doing a Grand Challenge Scholar program, or even at schools where they're interested in it but a formal program doesn't exist, to grad students or people who are working in businesses or alums of the program who can collaborate on projects or things, I think that would be awesome. I mean, you mentioned I had started some science communication project, and that was interesting, and that was something that was perfect for, I needed some help that an undergrad would be who was interested would be able to provide, and if we could work together on that, I think that's another way to foment connections and relationships spanning alumni and current students.
Well, that's an interesting idea, and that kind of leads to a question I was going to ask you all, is what, in terms of next directions for the program, what would you like to see it, how would you like to see it morph and evolve and change to be even better? And that was a really nice setup for that, Kushal, thank you. connections to graduate students, but maybe connections to other professionals, National Academy members, and so on, would be another nice direction. Any other ideas? Any other wish list that you guys have about where you'd like to see the program go?
I think the 5 components can really apply to somewhat at any level. It could even apply to high school students, to even working professionals as well. I don't see a reason to limit this to only an undergraduate initiative.
So several of you did, for your service component, actually brought Grand Challenges to the K-12 level. How did that work out? How did the students at that level respond to it? Is it too advanced for them? What do you think?
I think it was. Sure. I mean, I think I tried teaching some of these things, but instead of pitching it as a specific Grand Challenge, ended up like leading a career management class, which is interesting because I didn't have a career at that time. I still arguably don't have a career, but I found that I was like, maybe the best thing to do is let students work on projects that they're interested in. So I did a survey, and a lot of the things that they were interested in working on, some people are interested in renewables, some people are interested in computer science, and just letting them create their own projects related to that inevitably ended up tying to Grand Challenges in one way or another. And being only a few years older, I wouldn't have been able to police the class properly anyway, but I didn't have to because they were too into what they were doing, and they policed themselves. So I think it's definitely doable.
So, yeah, when you go out to the schools, you can get drawn in, and you get, I guess it became an unofficial ambassador for Teach for America or something at that point. Yeah. Okay, at this point, I'd like to turn it open to the audience. Maybe we can have some house lights and some questions. And if I could get help from the staff in the back, I've got the questions from the last panel about vaccines and disease. And I need some help getting to the questions for this panel. If someone could come out and take those. Any questions from the audience? We're right here. The box is coming. Throw it. Yay. Could you stand up and
yeah, sure.
Identify yourself?
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, it works. Okay. Hi, I'm Dennis Zhang. I'm from Harvard, an undergrad. And my question was to you guys, looking back, this might be, I don't know how you choose really, but among the 5 focuses of the Grand Challenges program, which did you find most important to you and why?
I think for me the most important one was service, because I feel like the whole point of the Grand Challenges is to serve, whether it's your local community or the global community. So I think the service component resonated with me the most.
I think I agree with him, and I think Raj hinted at that earlier this morning, where he said if you do service early in life, it positions you better to make better career choices. And I think for me that definitely helped when you have to be faced with what pays better versus what you feel like you're giving back to the community. I think service learning definitely put me on the right track with that one.
Very interesting question. I'm going to take a question now from the iPad, which is projecting for me now. This is an interesting one. Why is there a lack of engineering leadership education on the undergraduate level, and does the Grand Challenge Scholars Program address this, so that more engineers are starting companies, nonprofit ventures, and are leaders on teams rather than just the technical person on the team?
I think the Grand Challenge program definitely addresses this. I think one of the reasons engineers used to just be a technical person sitting in a room is that's what we learned at school. You went to school, you did a problem set, you sat in a room by yourself, and you didn't interact with anyone else.
Right.
And when you think about being involved in a team and on projects, and this is why I went into product and then went into executive roles, you're thinking about what are we building, why, how are we going to get there, how are we going to get it done, how are we going to harness all of these things together. And I think the more projects, and particularly the more team projects we have in the undergraduate level, the more we'll see engineers in other areas.
So the program sort of addresses this question organically, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So there's a question at the bottom about how it works at your school. How many people, where did it go, applied to the Grand Challenge Scholar Program, and how many are selected? Is this I guess, Amara, you mentioned that at your school it's sort of an honors program.
It used to be, so now it has evolved because, so it used to be an honors program, or not honors, but almost unwritten rule that it was honors because the classes you took were honors. But now you don't have to be a sophomore anymore, and you don't have to have that GPA requirement because they realize that, why I set a barrier on who and who cannot be a Grand Challenge scholar? So in my school, it's you apply, you have a GC theme or Grand Challenge theme you want to work on, and you write a personal statement more or less as to why and how you hope to achieve it. There's a committee that reviews your application, and you get accepted. I don't know anybody who hasn't gotten accepted, so it's just about do your homework about what you want to do and convince them.
I would add that, maybe for schools and whether either for some reason you're not able to join the program that exists or schools that don't have it, if you look at the 5 components and the programs at different schools, those are mostly things that you can do with your own initiative, and that's the whole point of the program itself. So it might be a little bit more work to find a mentor who's willing to talk through that with you, but it's just as valuable of an experience, if not more, to do that yourself, whether you have an issue getting into the program at your school or not.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Question at the microphone?
Hi, I'm from Colorado School of Mines, and our program just started up this last semester. So how do you recommend getting student involvement and making the program known to the campus?
That's a great question, and when I figure it out, I'll let you know. We did a lot of our work the first few semesters was on kind of advertising and trying to establish a presence on campus. But our program at Clemson is so small, kind of talking about how students apply. There's an application in the fall, and we really only have room for 8 to 12 students. So on the one hand, we wanted to grow the program, but we also didn't want to let everyone know about it and then have too many applications for the administrators to process. So the best way that we did it was we visited every freshman engineering class on one day, and it was called Grand Challenge Day, and we would have activities for the freshman students in engineering to learn about the Grand Challenges and the Grand Challenge Scholars Program, along with just the 14 challenges in general. And that was a great way so that every engineering student, even if they don't know everything about the program, they were at least familiar with it.
Thank you.
Very good. Kushal, backstage, we had a brief conversation about students from universities that don't have Grand Challenge Scholars programs, and you had an interesting piece of advice for those students, the idea that, okay, you could form your own 5 components, and could you explain a little what your advice would be to students here?
Sure. Like I mentioned in the previous comment, I think that even in schools that have these Grand Challenge Scholar programs, the large part of it is a creation of how you incorporate these 5 components into a meaningful undergraduate experience for each scholar itself. So while there is a funding component, or sometimes not, that is associated with the school, you can do that without having an official name brand program at your school and get just as much out of that experience. I think that one of the ways that might be interesting to get mentorship for this is either finding professors or administrators at your school who would be interested, or even connecting with current Grand Challenge Scholar alums or people who have done it before at other schools, and having them help you think about how you'd want to structure this experience for yourself. And to be honest, I think all of us would be more than happy to engage in that.
Great. That's an offer. One more question at the mic.
Yeah, so you kind of went through this program, addressed all these 5 different criteria. Coming out of it now, do you feel really inspired or excited about a certain subset of the actual Grand Challenges themselves? I know some of you are doing really specific research, but have you kind of been inspired to take the next step and pursue one of these big issues?
Absolutely. So my Grand Challenge theme in my undergrad was developing carbon sequestration methods, but over time, also partly due to the research I did, I'm tilting towards making solar energy more economical. And in grad school now, in my Global Policy Studies program at UT Austin, my research project this coming fall is going to be on understanding how solar energy works and how to better deploy it to rural areas and things like that. So that still addresses the Grand Challenge, or one of the 14 Grand Challenge colleges, even though I'm not even engineering. So I'm still definitely, motivated, inspired, determined to address one of them, even though it's different from the one I started off at.
I think to tie that backwards, a way I think the program could evolve over time, I'm not still tackling one of those 14, and I actually think a lot of the problems facing the world aren't going to be things that we get a bunch of smart people in a room and they sit down and they say, these are the best 14. I think there are going to be a lot of other things we want to solve. I think there'll be opportunities that don't even look like problems right now until we have a solution. And so I think from that regard, as long as we have a set of 14 that are broad enough to inspire people to take on problems like that, I think we've achieved the goal of the program.
Absolutely.
Cool. Thank you.
Thank you. One last question, and then we'll wrap up.
I think it's remarkable how all of you are taking such big risks, doing things that are outside, as you said, your STEM comfort zone, starting your own company, going to a different country, changing career paths, going into public policy. So how did you get yourself to become comfortable with not going the conventional way? You see all your peers do technical projects, work with technical companies, you know, the traditional things to be a good engineer, and then how do you convince yourself to take a gap year, pursue public policy, go to a different country, start your own company?
So for me, it was, partly because of the Grand Challenge Scholarship, as well as other experiences, I gained an interest in public policy and science policy, like as I was graduating. And I'd already gotten into my PhD program, but it was clear to me that like once you enter that tunnel, it's, you don't really look up until you get out. So it was really important to me I knew I'd regret it if I didn't take a chance at exploring this interest, and I'm really glad I experienced science policy then, and it's something I definitely plan on engaging with later on, and it gives me perspective during my PhD and what I may want to do afterwards. So I think to your first question as to how do you get comfortable with this, like my best advice would be it's kind of like a muscle, like if you take a plunge a few times, you get desensitized to it.
I think to add to that, it's recognizing that people have different roles to play in the world. And like for me, the Grand Challenge Scholars made me realize that, because in my internship, I worked as an engineer, but somebody needed to convey to the non-engineers what the engineers were discussing. So you need to, why not be that person who can do both, who can speak engineering and speak the other thing? So it's not really a trade-off as to they're following the technical route and I'm not. It's recognizing each person has a part to play and choosing what part makes you most comfortable in.
Why not be that person who can do both?
Exactly.
Listen, I want to thank all of you for really sharing these wonderful stories that give us a great feeling for what this program is and what it can be. And I just want to close with this final thought. And my colleague Yanis Yortsos and I tend to refer to our Greek heritage. And we like to think about the impact that the 300 Spartans had with their special skills and motivation, and the impact that had on changing the course of civilization for the ancient world. Well, that was 300. Imagine the impact of 10,000, Kushals, Amaras, Ellens, and Aaron's. Blanking here. Aaron's, I'm sorry, Aaron. This is what being on stage will do for you. But imagine 10,000 of you and the impact that you will have on our society and our future. Thank you all very much. Thank you to the audience. Yeah, good job.